Welcome back. And in about 3 minutes, we're looking at Alabama, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, and Maine. Alabama takes on an extra kind of significance tonight because of the trend we've seen. And our man in Bessemer, Alabama tonight is Trymaine Lee, looking to see if Biden can thread the needle across the South. Hey, Trymaine.
Hey, Brian. So I'm here in Bessemer, which is about 20 minutes outside of Birmingham, and I've been talking to voters all day about what went into their decision in terms of who they were voting for. And a couple themes emerged. One, it was after almost 4 years of Donald Trump, a sense of normalcy. Let's get back to normal, steady the ship. But the other was decency. And people said it time and again, they wanted a decent candidate to go up against Donald Trump. And when I asked folks about whether Joe Biden's win in South Carolina and whether all of the endorsements that flooded in after South Carolina mattered to them, they said most definitely. It reassured them of their decision. But when I asked them about James Clyburn in particular, that speech he gave introducing Joe Biden, when he said this is a good man, here in Alabama, 55 years after, almost to the date of Bloody Sunday, when people were beaten bloody on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, those were good men and good women to these folks in this state. Let's not forget, 55 years, we are among a generation of black people who really are the first to have their right to vote legally sanctioned. That's not lost on folks here. And so when they talk about this sense of normalcy and decency and steadying the ship, the fingers point towards Joe Biden. Now, I talked to a bunch of folks, still a small sample size, but they said it came down to Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders mostly. They had one Bloomberg, but Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, and they said they felt best with Joe Biden. Small sample size, but this is what the folks are saying, Brian.
Thanks for giving us something we can improve on, Trymaine Lee, with an enormous bit of reporting and eloquence from Bessemer, Alabama.
I also just want to reiterate one little piece of news that we touched on earlier, which is that we had earlier in the night expected that one of the poll closings at 8 o'clock Eastern is going to be Tennessee. We are not going to be making any sort of call in Tennessee, regardless of what the numbers are, because there have been some polls that have been extended because of the deadly tornadoes in Tennessee. And so because of polls being extended in Davidson County, also some large sort of hub election sites being held open even further than an additional hour, there will not be a call at the 8 o'clock, what had previously been the 8 o'clock poll closing, no matter what numbers we get in from the state. So just to avoid confusion there, we're looking at numbers and potentially calls now from Alabama, Maine, Massachusetts, and Oklahoma.
And any other given night on this network, we would be talking about the horrendous loss of life in the Nashville metropolitan area. But of course, this is our lead story tonight while we keep them in our thoughts. Coming up on 10 seconds now, again, Maine, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Alabama are our closings. It's 8 o'clock Eastern time. Let's get going. And it looks like, to Trymaine's message he was receiving from voters about normalcy, about decency, voters in Alabama have delivered for Joe Biden, the projected winner at poll closing. Massachusetts, too early to call.
Ow.
You see there your top two leaders. Oklahoma, too early to call. And in the great state of Maine, all the way up north, too early to call. Quick reminder how they stack up so far tonight. We called North Carolina for Joe Biden at poll closing. We called the Commonwealth of Virginia for Joe Biden at poll closing. We called the state of Vermont for favorite son, local man, Bernie Sanders. The delegates earned tonight the commanding lead of Joe Biden with the proviso that it's early yet. The delegates earned thus far this primary and caucus season for the Democrats. See above proviso. The numbers are impressive. Steve Kornacki has more of them at the big board. Steve, throw Alabama on the pile.
We have been talking about the black vote looking a lot tonight like it did in South Carolina. Alabama, this is going to have the largest black population of any state tonight. You heard the call for Biden. 44% in Alabama, African-American tonight. 72% of them going for Joe Biden, nearly half the electorate. He's getting more than 70% of the vote from black voters in Alabama. This is overwhelming. Looks like it's on pace to be bigger than what we're looking at in North Carolina and Virginia, just when you look at this. Something else significant we're seeing. You mentioned in Massachusetts, no call in that race at poll closing time. We haven't had that in the South so far. Take a look at what we're seeing here in Massachusetts. I'll break down by gender in Massachusetts. So first of all, among men, 44% of the electorate. You see Sanders leading here. Look at this, by the way. You see Biden at 30%. Excuse me. Let me just get this right. I see Biden here twice. I want to make sure I'm getting this correct. Warren is 19 here. Is that correct, Adam? I'm asking my producer this. The key I wanted to tell you, yes, Warren is at 19. This would be 36 Sanders, 30 Biden, and 19 for Warren. And if you look at women in Massachusetts, check this out. You see Biden 28, Warren 30. So first of all, you see a gender gap, but I think the most significant thing you see in this exit poll is that Joe Biden is 30% with men and 28% with women. In other words, he is way over that 15% threshold. Just a couple of days ago, there was a poll in Massachusetts, and he was running at 11%. At 11%, Joe Biden was going to get 0 delegates out of Massachusetts. Running at 28, 30, anywhere in that range, he's going to be collecting delegates from Massachusetts. What is coming into focus? When you look at the call we had in North Carolina, in Virginia, in North Carolina, in Alabama, and when you look at the scale of the victory that Joe Biden is racking up in those states, there's the potential from those 3 states alone for Joe Biden to net something like 100 delegates over Sanders, meaning his cumulative margin in those states over Sanders and delegates could end up being something around 100. Biden leading Sanders by 100 delegates coming out of those 3 states alone, with an opportunity for Biden to add to that in Tennessee and Arkansas, states with some similar demographics. It was an open question a week ago if Biden was going to be able to get even as many delegates as Bernie Sanders in these states. Instead, looks like he's due for a massive haul out of here. And then when you see Biden making the delegate threshold in Massachusetts, potentially being well over that threshold in Massachusetts, it tells you, first of all, he's not going to get shut out of delegates. That was looking like a possibility the other day. It also looks like there's a potential there. Maybe Biden wins it, maybe Sanders wins it, maybe Warren wins Massachusetts, but if they're bunched together, no one's getting a clear delegate advantage out of Massachusetts. Maybe one wins it by 5 delegates, maybe the other wins it by 5 delegates. Maine, Vermont, coming out of New England, Sanders, if you got close races in Maine and Massachusetts and just Vermont, Sanders is netting 10, 20, 25 delegates out of New England, falling behind by over 100 in the South. We said at the start of the night, a dream scenario for Biden on what was supposed to be Sanders' big night. Dream scenario for Biden is he leads in total delegates at the end of the night. We are, 2 hours into our broadcast? It is more possible now that will be the case than it was when we came on.
Steve Kornacki, can I ask you a clarifying question about the Massachusetts results? When
Yes.
Brian did the call there, he described the NBC projection as too early to call, and then we got a picture of Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden for Massachusetts.
Yes.
Obviously, Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren's home state, and the numbers you were just showing, at least in terms of the gender breakdown, it looks like Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was holding her own there. Is she in contention there, or was that a signal?
Yeah, no, you can see, look, the electorate here can try to do this math yourself here, but you see the electorate here, it's a little bit more than 50, it's 56% female. You see Warren is in the exit poll leading that slightly. It's just there is that gender gap, and I apologize, this graphic is confusing, but Warren, okay, it's been fixed now. Warren running back at 19%. What you're seeing, again, Biden, 30 and 28 between those two groups. So Sanders benefiting more from male support, Warren benefiting more from female support, Biden kind of threading the needle there, doing well with both groups. And I think if you do the math, at least you see in the exit poll, maybe Biden and Sanders a little bit up on Warren there, but we will see as the results come in.
And again, the projection there, too early to call, fascinating. That's obviously important for Senator Warren because that's her home state. Also interesting, we get a call at closing time from Alabama that for Vice President Biden. We don't get calls. It's also too early to call in Maine and in Oklahoma. If my memory serves, those are both states that Senator Sanders won in 2016 over Hillary Clinton. He was 64-36 in the Maine caucuses. And in Oklahoma, he won by 10 points in 2016. But in both of those states, we've got too early to call. At this point, fascinating slew of results. Let's bring into the conversation now the beloved Reverend Al Sharpton. It is great to have you here, Rev, president of the National Action Network, the host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC. You were just in Alabama, were you not?
That's right.
What do you make of this poll closing call?
I'm not surprised. I think that I've been saying all along that if you go into states that have diversity, Biden was always a favorite. And I think a lot of it has to do with his work with Barack Obama. But I think a lot of it was also accelerated by what happened in South Carolina. And what I think we're seeing tonight, and I think you or Brian mentioned it, is that the surge of young voters has not happened so far. The night is early. And the turnout seems to be more Biden in the states that we've seen than we've seen of Sanders. And I think a lot of us were buying into what ends up now looking like some political talk or projections by one camp rather than the reality. As I traveled around the country, a lot of people were saying they want stability. With the coronavirus, don't underestimate the impact that could be of in the middle of this disaster, and you're looking at a president that starts by calling it a hoax and now is still fumbling. A lot of that are in people's minds as they went to vote today. And so far tonight is a huge night for Joe Biden.
Let me ask you about Senator Sanders in the South. I mean, one of the things that seems very positive for Senator Sanders is obviously he's been the national frontrunner. So also, he seems to have been really improving his standing among Latino voters. That said, he got crushed by Hillary Clinton in the South in 2016. He ran basically equal with her everywhere else in the country except in the South, where she just shellacked him. That hasn't changed. I mean, he just got walloped in South Carolina by 30 points with the best turnout yet. He has been walloped apparently tonight in Virginia and in North Carolina and in Alabama with these poll closing calls, which means it's not going to be close in any of those states. I mean, I thought that Senator Sanders was adding to his likability and to sort of his range by really turning it up with Latino voters, but we're not seeing any sign of that at all in the South and among black voters in particular.
We're not seeing that at all, and I think we must remember, even in Nevada, Rachel, which was a caucus, by the way, not a primary, he lost the black vote in Nevada. He lost the black vote, where he did very well with Latino voters. I think people misunderstand that a lot of people in the African-American community are a lot more conservative on some issues than they are on racial issues, and that they miss that when you look at the breakdown of their opinions on certain things. And I think Joe Biden is closer to that with a lot of people I talk to. I'm probably further left than a lot of blacks in the South. And it's not only because I'm from the North, but it's just the way this landscape is in the country, and I think we don't really have a feel for it.
Do African-American voters turning out at every age group and across the gender divide for Joe Biden signal something nationally? I mean, we talk all the time at 4 o'clock about how, you know, if you oppose Donald Trump from a policy perspective or you're offended by the rule of law, that's nothing compared to feeling targeted or feeling, you know, with the immigration policies and the whole bucket of issues just seem to be more urgently felt in diverse communities in diverse states. Do you think that that is just something that we've sort of paid less attention to than we should have? I mean, the writing's been on the wall in every poll. Biden's been on top of every poll in South Carolina and in southern states for almost a year.
Because you're not discriminated against based on age. And when you're dealing with people that have been shut out or failed discriminated, whether you're young or old, you want to fight that. And I think that a lot of people saw a generation gap that was more acute in their mind than it was in reality. Now, there are differences between young blacks and older blacks. There's a lot different between me and my daughters. But it doesn't mean that we would not go in politically to say we want to see the same kinds of things to confront the inequality and the institutional bigotry that we have to face. And you face it because of the color of your skin.
Rev, let's mirror a brief conversation we had during the break. Tonight, we're missing our mutual friend, who I'd never normally describe as retiring, Chris Matthews. Chris liked, above all, destroying a political bromide, and he loved a political moment, which brings me to the endorsement in South Carolina in an era where we're not supposed to have kingmakers in our politics anymore. I think we disproved that.
I think that James Clyburn has an impeccable reputation across the board, even beyond his congressional district, and it meant a lot because you must remember, he endorsed him at a time when there was not all of the guarantees that Biden would do as well as he did. Right. It was a lot of risk. And for Clyburn to stand there and take that risk and say, this is a good man, he spoke to the hearts of a lot of people that trust him and that trust his judgment. And if you're going to run in South Carolina, I did. You want Jim Clyburn, if he's not going to endorse you, at least be nice to you. And it means a whole lot because he is the guy that in the South, I don't know anyone that has more stature than him, probably not in the Congress. He and Elijah Cummings were the two guys in the Congress that everybody related to. And I think that Clyburn deserves a lot of credit tonight.
It was 2 days after the Nevada caucuses. I mean, it was 2 days after Sanders, as Steve Kornacki keeps saying, looked like he might be steamrolling his way to the nomination.
It was 2 days after the whole world was saying that Bernie Sanders is going to roll this all the way through, and Clyburn stood in front of the storm and said, hold it a minute, I'm with this guy. And I think it took a lot of courage. We did a breakfast that morning, a minister's breakfast.
Right, that's right.
And of National Action Network. And when Clyburn walked in there, he told me on his way out, I'm announcing my endorsement. And it was a morning that people would say, why would he do that right after Nevada? But that's the kind of guy he is. That's why he's earned that kind of trust.
Can we talk for a second about Mike Bloomberg? Heading into Super Tuesday, he was the big black box. Nobody knows how he's going to affect this race. Nobody's ever run exactly in this way. Nobody's ever run with quite that big a truckload of money clearing the way for him. But so far, we've got results from Vermont, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama. We've got too early to call in Maine, Massachusetts, and Oklahoma. We do have a Mike Bloomberg victory in American Samoa, but we don't have him placing, apparently, as of yet, in the top two in any of the other states that we've either got results from or that we are still watching. If this is going to be the kind of night that Mike Bloomberg has, and maybe somewhere other than American Samoa will turn out to be Bloomberg country, but if that's it, what happens to Mike Bloomberg in this race, Rev?
I think that Mike Bloomberg should keep his war chest there and help someone that can win. I think that he said he would spend up to $1 billion, no matter who the winner was, and I think he ought to start preparing. We'll see what happens the rest of the night, but preparing to start doing some money transfers.
You know what I've been imagining? A meeting convened by the Reverend Al Sharpton between Mike Bloomberg and Democratic Party likely nominee Bernie Sanders.
Listen to you stirring things up.
Yeah. Senator Sanders is still one of the two frontrunners at this point. We don't know how things are going to go. California is going to be huge. Texas is going to be huge for him. We'll see. If he ends up fighting to the death with Joe Biden, it looks like Bernie's going to pull it out, and he's going to be the nominee. He's the only candidate in the Democratic field who said, I don't want Mike Bloomberg's money. Oh, he wants to get Donald Trump out of the White House. I'd rather not have it than than give up any benefit that he's going to give me. Does somebody like you, who knows everybody in the Democratic Party, does somebody who has a good faith reputation and is a good negotiator who has credit with all sides, step in then to try to undo that, to try to make sure that Bloomberg's money still runs?
I don't know if I'm no person, but I think somebody should say that the goal is to try to save this country and bring it back to a level of decency and the standard of the presidency where it's respectable. And that argument should be made if we get to that point.
I think you'd be the best one to make it, I'm just saying.
Seems like you two should talk offline. Rev, thank you for stopping by our conversation.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Appreciate it. Now to our human delegate calculator, one David Plouffe, standing by. David, where are we?
Well, I want to start by saying, we've talked about, wow, just 3 or 4 days ago, Joe Biden was trailing in North Carolina. We had dead seats in Virginia. How can he win? Let's remember, in politics, it's always easier for a candidate to win back vote they lost that they never had. So when Biden was performing poorly in debates in Iowa and New Hampshire, a lot of his support, African-American voters primarily, parked in undecideds. Once he showed strength, they came back to him. And none of the other candidates in the field, Rachel talked about Bernie Sanders struggled with the African-American community, was able to build support there. So where we are from a delegate standpoint is it's a dream night for Joe Biden so far. this was a night I thought he needed to survive even after South Carolina. He may end up thriving. So he's going to end as we get into the Midwestern and Western part of the night, with a delegate advantage. Steve Kornacki in the last hour mentioned if you're Joe Biden, you actually don't want Mike Bloomberg or Elizabeth Warren to reach viability in Virginia or North Carolina because you will net more delegates. This is how crazy the delegate system is. Joe Biden may, when we get to California, be hoping that Bloomberg and Warren, or at least one of them, is viable to keep Bernie Sanders' delegate yield down in California. So it's going as good as Joe Biden could have ever imagined. And again, it's worth, like Virginia, you've got the Washington, D.C. media market. You've got Tidewater, Richmond. It's a big state, North Carolina. These are expensive states. Joe Biden is racking up delegates with no money. Little organization, no staff. And so he's benefiting from his national poll leader position in the race. He held almost all of 19. He lost it for a few weeks. Now he's getting it back. And I think if you're the Biden campaign, you look ahead to March 10th, March 17th, March 24th. Can I put money and organization together with the momentum and to take a delegate lead that he might never lose?
And Steve Kornacki, as speaking of upending political bromides, having one field office and winning a state certainly does that and puts on its ear the usual argument about ground game.
That field office covered a lot of ground because you are seeing it from Virginia Beach and Norfolk to Richmond and its suburbs to the Washington, D.C. suburbs down to Southwest Virginia. This map is looking like South Carolina. It's almost every county here, Biden blue. And look, you've basically got 2/3 of the vote in, and this 30-point margin for Joe Biden is holding. Our decision desk has not allocated all of the delegates here. But again, if something like this holds, you're looking at Biden getting like 70 delegates out of Virginia. You're looking at Sanders getting like 29. Our decision desk has projected that Sanders will get some delegates. But again, the hope for Sanders here was to get the most delegates out of Virginia. And look, if Biden's getting something like that out of here, Sanders has one big win tonight. It's his home state. He's winning this thing by a similar margin. But what would this translate to? This would be something like 12-4. So maybe Sanders would net like 8 out of here. Meanwhile, he's losing 40 in Virginia. And what's happening in Virginia is happening in North Carolina and Alabama and could happen all across the South.
I have a request. At some point, can you put together a map of counties, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia? I'd love to see how that looks.
Everything together.
Tonight.
Give it a shot.
If that breaks the big board, we're going to have to take up a collection.
This is why we can't have nice things. We're not even halfway there yet on a huge night of results. Don't forget, Arkansas closes at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break now. We'll come back with that uninterrupted. Welcome back. In these next few minutes, we have another poll closing. But first, we have pictures of the long lines, first in East L.A. and then in Sacramento, California, with folks taking this primary election day seriously. Remember, California is not usually in the money on Super Tuesday, so this is a huge opportunity for the 40 million Americans.
Can I also just say we
you
have
can say whatever you wish. Well,
we have seen reports tonight of long lines, seemingly for different reasons in different states all over the country. I would just say, if you are in line to vote, if you are waiting in line, if you are considering whether or not to get in that line, your country needs you. Thank you for going out and voting. Thank you for sticking with it. If you are standing in line right now and you've got stuff to do and you're worried maybe this is going to be for naught because the polls are going to close before I get to the front of the line, that's not true. If you are in line, you will be allowed to vote. And if anybody tries to tell you different, have them call me. I mean, this is a moment where this is a really important election. This is a really important primary. You making the effort to vote means everything. It sucks in our country that it is so hard to vote. And that happens in Democratic-controlled states and Republican-controlled states. And sometimes it's inadvertent, and sometimes it's on purpose, which is evil. But if you are out voting, stick with it, and your country thanks you.
It also may be that after a long day at work, promotion, you're listening to us on Sirius XM satellite radio, and you're on your way to the polls, and you're wavering. To Rachel's point, the car knows where to go.
Get in line.
Alicia Menendez is in Beto O'Rourke's hometown of El Paso, Texas. Alicia, tell us what you've seen there today and tonight.
Brian, we have less than 40 minutes until polls close here in El Paso. We've been at this polling location all day speaking with voters. We spoke with one Sanders supporter who said she made her mind up weeks ago, but otherwise every single voter we've spoke with cast their vote for Joe Biden, and they made their mind up in the last few days. They say they were waiting to watch what happens in South Carolina, and the triumvirate of endorsements from O'Rourke, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar, many candidates they had considered voting for, put them over the edge. Remember, this is also a large Latino community. 85% of the population of this county is Latino. Just 7 months ago, this community was rocked when a white nationalist went on a shooting spree, leaving 22 dead, 24 injured. It's also a border town. We're just a few miles from Juarez, where the humanitarian crisis at our border is in sharp focus. And so the voters we spoke with said those issues might not be front of mind, but they have voters focused on one singular question: who can beat Donald Trump in November?
That's terrific
Brian?
reporting from El Paso.
Yes, thank you.
Alicia, thank you for that.
We should mention there's some numbers on the side of the screen that you saw there from Texas. Even though most Texas polling places haven't closed, we do have the first numbers coming in from the slice of Texas that is in a different time zone than the other polling places that are still open. That's why you're seeing some early numbers.
They're real, raw numbers. They're publicly reportable. We're just holding off on any characterization we will make until all time zones have worked their way to the West. Donna Edwards is with us, former Maryland Democratic Congresswoman, these days a column writer for the Washington Post. Tell the folks watching what you said when you sat down with us.
Well, I think, you know, if you look at the vote that's taken place, first of all, of the voters, black voters in particular, who've been driving this in South Carolina, I started to get an idea of what was going to happen in North Carolina and states like Virginia, looking at the suburbs of South Carolina. They're the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. And those all went to Joe Biden. And that told me a lot. It's my home state. That told me a lot about what was going to happen
so looking at
in North Carolina.
Looking at the South Carolina results, some of those counties and towns that are adjacent, essentially adjacent to North Carolina communities.
They're bedroom communities of Charlotte, North Carolina. And Charlotte, you know, a lot of highly educated voters, research, the financial sector. Banking. And those are the voters who are voting in North Carolina. And then I think you couple that with what has happened in Virginia, those Northern Virginia suburbs, and also Charlottesville. Those are voters who are Democrats. They're moderate Democrats, so it's not a surprise to me. Look, I'm a progressive, and I love, you know, voting progressive. But I know that in order to, you know, to win a national election, we have to figure out a way that we pull all of this together. And who pulls that under the tent?
Were you at all shy about that conclusion that you started to come through watching South Carolina, knowing about the kinds of money that was spent in North Carolina? I mean, Bloomberg over $12 million in the state, Sanders nearly $2 million in the state, Biden's under $300,000 in North Carolina. Nevertheless, he gets a poll-closing definitive call that he's going to be the projected winner there.
Well, part of it is that, you know, especially some of the black voters that we're talking about, a third of the, or a quarter of the electorate in North Carolina, those are voters who want to vote for somebody they trust, and also they want to cast a vote for somebody who's going to win. And I think South Carolina told them that, and you can see that projected all through the South, and I think we're going to see it across the country tonight.
Here's what's going to happen. You've got the counter in the corner of your screen. We're going to listen into Mike Bloomberg for a bit, and then we have a call. We have a poll closing in Arkansas at the bottom of the hour.
Florida leaders supporting our campaign, including Mayors Manny Diaz, Phil Levine, Bob Buckhorn, Keith James, and Congress members Ted Deutsch and Stephanie Murphy. Let's hear it for them. Now, it's great to be here in this beautiful state. I know you're not used to seeing a New Yorker in southern Florida in late winter. But unlike the president, I didn't come here to golf. Or to reveal classified information to Mar-a-Lago members. I came here because winning in November starts with Florida. And if I'm the nominee, let me make you this promise. We will beat Donald Trump here in Florida and in swing states around the country. Now, the night the polls are still open in a number of Super Tuesday states, and as the results come in, here's what is clear. No matter how many delegates we win tonight, we have done something no one else thought was possible. In just 3 months, we've gone from 1%
It is
of the polls
8:30 Eastern Time, and you'll note we're just bringing this in from the side because we only have 1% in, and in Arkansas, the result is too early to call. Please note Biden with 59% of that 1%, Bloomberg with 22% of the 1%. We'll go back and listen to Mike Bloomberg, who is, fair to say, not having the night he thought he paid for, not having the night he was hoping for.
And to start rebuilding our country and to start getting things done. And I mean big, important things like stopping gun violence and fighting climate change, and finally achieving affordable health coverage for all Americans. This is a campaign for change, a campaign for sanity, for honesty, a campaign for inclusion, compassion, competence, and a campaign for human decency. And this is a campaign to bring our country back together and put the United back in the United States of America. That's the message I've been delivering not only to Democrats, but also to swing voters who will actually decide who will be our next president. And tonight, we proved something very important. We proved we can win the voters who will decide the general election. And isn't that what this is all about? Now, while my fellow candidates spent a whole year focusing on the first 4 states, I was out campaigning against Donald Trump in the states where the election will actually be decided, like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pittsburgh and Ohio and North Carolina and, of course, Florida. President Obama proved that a Democrat can win all of those states, but in 2016, we lost them all. Well, I'm running to win them back. And together, we're going to get it done. Now, we all know Trump's strategy: attack Democrats, make their plans look unrealistic, unaffordable, and undoable. That won't work against us. Our plans are sensible, workable, and achievable, and we have the record and the resources to defeat Trump in swing states the Democrats lost in 2016, like Florida. I know we can do it, and you know who else knows it? Donald Trump. And that's why he keeps attacking us on Twitter. Today, he sent a tweet out urging people not to vote for us. Gee, I wonder why. Clearly, Trump is scared stiff of facing us, and for good reason. In every campaign I ran for mayor, we built a broad coalition that brought Democrats and independents and moderate Republicans together. Donald Trump the other day called me short. I said, Donald, where I come from, we measure people from the neck up. That's how we're going to beat Donald Trump. I believe we need a leader who is ready to be commander-in-chief, not college debater-in-chief. So if you want someone who talks turkey and who has a record of accomplishment on all the big issues facing our country and who has the resources to beat Trump, I'm your guy. And while Trump tweets, I follow facts, respect data, and tell the truth. My whole career, I have been a doer. And I believe we need less talk, less partisanship, less division, less tweeting. In fact, how about no tweeting from the Oval Office ever again? Now, you've all heard our campaign slogan, Mike will get it done. Well, let me tell you what the it is. It means winning this November and sending Donald Trump back to Mar-a-Lago permanently.
We are back in the studio. We've been watching Mike Bloomberg in West Palm down in Florida, where the contest is part of another big night, March 17th. And we thought right about now would be a good time to ask Steve Kornacki. I just read our friend Rick Wilson says Joe-mentum is real tonight, so we've established that. What about Mike-mentum? How good, how bad a night is the billionaire former mayor of New York City having?
Couple ways to look at this. First of all, you can see the delegate count here. And remember, you're seeing these big wins for Biden in big states. The count you're seeing right here, and it just went up, by the way, a lot of those delegates in those states have yet to be allocated formally by our decision desk. So in the next hour or so, you can expect that Biden number to keep growing. Where do you see Bloomberg? He's got 4 from American Samoa. That's what he's got to show for Super Tuesday so far. One way of looking at this, we can take Virginia, where almost all the results are in now. Wow. 93%. It continues to be 54, 23, wow. And you can see a couple things. Yeah, a couple things to point out.
30-point margin?
31.
Good Lord.
This is like South Carolina last week, where you want to talk about how fast this thing changed, how fast this moved in the direction of Joe Biden. Just the other day, poll there, 26 for Sanders, 24 for Joe Biden. Tonight, 26-23, poll got Sanders about right, 30 points off for Biden. What happened? This is a big part of what happened. The fact that Bloomberg tonight is checking in at 10%, well under threshold in the state, threshold to get delegates. It just looks like, you say Mike-mentum, it looks like Mike-mentum of 2 weeks ago became Joe-mentum. That Joe Biden, after Nevada, when he got hot in South Carolina, when he won South Carolina, that whole theory that was out there that, hey, Bloomberg, if his supporters went somewhere else, it might be to Biden. You start to look at results like this in Virginia, and that's what you start to see. Now, where else would we see it? Take a look down here in North Carolina. Right now, you see 35% reporting. Bloomberg is sitting there at 17%. That would be over threshold. Here's a really interesting real-time experiment you can follow. This 35% you're seeing in North Carolina, that is overwhelmingly early vote. In other words, votes that were cast before South Carolina, votes that were cast before the Joe-mentum era began. And you can see in that period, Biden was running about 32, Bloomberg about 17. See how those numbers change when the same-day vote comes in Carolina. Wow.
Steve Kornacki, am I allowed to ask you a follow-up question on race?
Yeah.
On South Carolina and Virginia, what proportion of the electorate in those two states is African-American on these two election nights? Are they roughly equivalent? Since I'm asking because we're seeing roughly similar margins for South Carolina and for Virginia.
Show you, they're not, is the short answer. I can show you the reason for that. In South Carolina, the number was 56%. 56% of the electorate was black. It's basically half that in Virginia. You're looking at 27%. What is the other piece of the equation in Virginia? It's what we talked about in 2018 and what we've been talking about for 2 years. Suburban voters, suburban white voters. I mean, the biggest county in the state, right here, Fairfax County, right in the D.C. suburbs. And there it is. Joe Biden, 52, Sanders, 23, Bloomberg, 12. I didn't see any Fairfax County-specific polling, but I bet a couple weeks ago, if you took a poll in Fairfax County, this number was a lot lower. This number was a lot higher. For that matter, this number was a lot higher. There really has, when you look at Virginia and you look at the polling we saw until South Carolina, there is a lot of persuasive evidence of consolidation around Biden and a ceiling for Sanders.
So the story of Joe Biden's success in the South, as told as of this point, is a story of African-American voters. It is also a story of suburban voters.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Unbelievable. All right, we're going to take another break. Don't forget that at the top of this next hour, 9 o'clock Eastern time, we have a big poll closing deep in the heart of Texas. These are live pictures of the lines to vote at one polling place in Austin, Texas. We will go there
Stay
live.
in line. Do not give up. Stay in line. Your vote will count.
You can all drive out to the Salt Lick for some quality barbecue, but you have to vote first. Look at that line.
It's inspiring, and it's also infuriating that people have to work that hard to vote.
Yeah, but the athleticism of our camera crews has to be admired. We'll be back with more right after this. We've had these partial Texas results available, publicly reported on the screen, but of course, we can't make a characterization until the last of the polls close in the great state of Texas, which is not until the top of this next hour. We went to the break showing you the lines to vote at a polling location in Austin, Texas, which is, of course, the seat of Travis County. Chris Jansing has been there talking to voters all the while. Hey, Chris.
The lines here are insane, Brian. As you know, I have been going to polling places on election nights many more years than I care to admit. This line goes all the way down there. They've got a guy who's in a chair there. They cut people off, 45 minutes ago. But look, I'm going to walk as fast as my cameraman can walk backwards. It just goes on and on and on. People have been waiting as long as 3 hours to vote here already here in Travis County. And I just got off the phone with officials here. They have far exceeded what they saw 4 years ago. 230,000 people total. They're at 254 now, and this isn't the only place where there are long lines. We're told elsewhere in this county, elsewhere in Harris County, the other big county, there are lines like this where they are hours long. Now, see a college crowd like this? You see a big turnout. Conventional wisdom is it's great for Bernie Sanders. The asterisk has been, would people change their minds at the last minute? I can tell you, the other polling place I just came from, fully a third of people made up their minds in the last 24 hours. 3 people told me they didn't know who they were voting for. There were just 2 young women back there. They didn't want to go on television who told me they didn't know who they were going to vote for. They wanted to know how long the line was. In other words, how long did they have to make up their mind? How long have you guys been waiting in line?
2 hours. Almost 2 hours.
Is it worth it?
Of course it's worth it. Civic engagement.
Yeah. How long would you be willing to wait in line?
As long as it takes.
Yeah. And that's pretty much what I got at the end of the line, too. People say they're willing to wait as long as it takes. Just before I came on here, Brian, finally, here's where they're getting cheers for being on television back there. This is finally the line that goes inside the entrance to voting. I just got off the phone with the folks at the State Democratic Party. They say, given these lines that they're seeing in just a few pockets of places around the state, they may not say exactly what the final count is until midnight local time, which is 1 a.m. your time. And then you have that whole thing about how to apportion delegates, which can get very dicey. And they say until they have 100% of the vote in or something very close, they aren't willing to do that. Just a quick reminder before I throw it back to you that, as we've seen before, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders fought it out here, but the winner of the popular vote did not get the most delegates, and so they're going to be very careful. They're counting very carefully. They literally have closed the door on what they call the war room at the State Democratic Party and are waiting for final results from places like this at the University of Texas. Brian?
I have 3 things to say. Number 1, hook 'em horns. Number 2, what could go wrong? Number 3, Chris, you've been absolved from any time on the hotel treadmill tomorrow. Chris Jansing in Austin, Texas for us tonight with the world's longest line to vote.
Thank you. It is awesome to see all those young... First of all, Austin and Texas as a whole is amazing. It's great to see all those people lined up. It's particularly kids lined up, young people lined up to vote when they don't know who they're going to vote for, but they're just there to make sure that they're going to figure it out by the time they're at the front of the line. I love it. But it is also an outrage. It is an outrage that it is this hard to cast a vote in this country. And I know it is not only Texas, but in Texas specifically, over successive electoral cycles over the past 10 years, the Republican-led government in Texas has made it harder and harder and harder to vote, not only in terms of the kind of documentation you have to show when you get there, but also they have been closing precincts. They've been closing voting places systematically, particularly in places that have high minority, young people, and poor people turnout. And so some of this is deliberate. And I will say, you see, spikes in voter turnout some places, and you get long lines, and it is more inspiring than infuriating because nobody tried to make this situation happen. But in some places in the country, and I believe Texas is one of them, it is because the state government wants it to be hard to vote. And it's wrong. And it should not take that much heroism and that much sacrifice to do your civic duty.
I was just watching the camera now reach the end of the line in Austin. I didn't mean to be staring out into the abyss. The home of 29 million of our fellow citizens, all in one great state. Steve Kornacki at the board with Texas Numbers.
As the voting continues out there, we have quite a few vote returns now in Texas. So let me tell you what you're looking at, and it just updated there. You see 15% reporting. You are looking at early vote. There's a lot of early vote taking place in Texas, and you see in the early vote that's tabulated so far, there's Mike Bloomberg, 20%. He'd be getting delegates. He'd be getting an awful lot of delegates with 20%. But the question to ask right now, again, when you see early vote tonight anywhere, you are looking at pre-South Carolina vote. This is a snapshot of what Texas looked like a week ago, 10 days ago, before the political world, before the world of this race changed. And in that world, Mike Bloomberg was running at 20%. Take a look here. We're getting early vote out of Dallas County. This is like 10% of the state. We just showed you Fairfax County in Virginia. We showed you Northern Virginia. This is another one of those places where you had suburbanites who flocked to the Democratic Party, gave them that blue wave in 2018. And you're seeing here Biden, very little of the same day starting to come in here. You see Biden narrowly leading, Bloomberg at 20. What happens when we start getting the same day? Does this Bloomberg number drop? Does this Warren number drop? Does this Biden number start to rise? You're going to look for that, too, down here in the biggest county of the state, Harris County. Again, you're looking at all early vote right here. You're looking at Biden narrowly edging out Sanders, but Bloomberg well over 20%. This is what Texas looked like 10 days ago. The question is it what Texas looks like tonight, or has there been a big change? That's what the same-day vote's going to tell us.
Steve Kornacki, the Biden campaign said on Saturday night, they said again tonight, that their definition of success in the state of Texas is to do well in Dallas and Houston. Why would that be? Can you talk about that strategy?
Let's take a look. Let's go right back. I'm going to zoom in so I can get it. Take a look at Dallas County. Again, 10% of the state. We just talked about there in Northern Virginia, those sort of swing voters, those suburbanites, folks who have been big into the Democratic Party in the Trump era. This is where you find them in Texas. You find them down there in Houston. You find them in Dallas. Take a look what happened here in this county in 2016. Hillary Clinton crushed Bernie Sanders here, 71-28. And again, that word ceiling, I wasn't sure if we'd be talking about it with Bernie Sanders at this point, but when you start seeing something like this, Bernie Sanders at 25% right now. Bernie Sanders was at 28% in a two-way race 4 years ago. Now, with far more candidates, he's still sitting there at 25. So with the Biden campaign saying they're optimistic about Dallas, they're hopeful about Dallas, they're hopeful about Harris, it's because they are hoping that since South Carolina, in the new world of Democratic presidential politics, the folks who were poised to vote for Mike Bloomberg will instead be voting for Joe Biden. That some of the folks who were poised to vote for Elizabeth Warren will instead be voting for Joe Biden. And what really had been almost a three-way race here, three candidates over 20%, will in the same-day vote become Biden moving up into the 30s, moving into a double-digit advantage over Sanders. And if Joe Biden can do that in Dallas County, if Joe Biden can do that down in Harris County, that's a quarter of the state. A quarter of the vote is from those two counties alone.
Wow. Steve Kornacki, thank you very much. Everything's big in Texas, including the implications of what voters do there tonight. Joining us now is Evan Smith. He's the CEO and co-founder of the Texas Tribune, which is a Texas institution but a national treasure. Mr. Smith, thank you so much for being with us. It's great to have you here tonight.
Thank you. Sure, happy to be here. Big night.
It is a big night, and we're watching these long lines of voters in certain precincts that we've got reporters at. What can you tell us from a sort of higher altitude view of what level of excitement there is about this primary in Texas today?
Well, there's enormous excitement about this race. Let me say, I heard you talking about the problems with long lines and why it's so difficult to vote. One of the things is we have 254 counties, and we have 254 election administrators. The voting system in Texas, Rachel, is a hot mess. And the problems you're seeing in Travis County, Austin, and Harris County, Houston, we're hearing reports of all kinds of problems around the state. That said, we had more than 2 million people vote in our 11-day early voting period, which ended last Friday. There was enormous enthusiasm in both parties, but particularly the Democratic Party, it appears, in this election cycle. And as you've said several times, that vote that we're seeing come in right now, that early vote, is really old news. It's pre-South Carolina. I am really eager to see what happens today. The results could look very different based on the last couple of days in Texas.
I feel like there's been a lot of national punditry about the Latino vote in the Democratic primary. And it's been a little bit facile and a little bit reductive. And we have seen Senator Sanders make great strides in terms of the way that he has tried to appeal and tried to build organizing efforts among Latino communities. But what should a national audience understand about the various Latino communities inside Texas and the types of appeal that the leading candidates might have for them?
Well, one thing about the Hispanic vote in Texas, and our experience over the last number of years, is that it is not monolithic. The assumption is that the Hispanic vote is like the Hispanic vote in California or the Hispanic vote in Nevada or the Hispanic vote somewhere else. The Hispanic vote in Texas tends to be a little bit more conservative, small c, not big C. Republicans tend to do well with Hispanic voters here to a degree that you don't see in a lot of other places. I don't necessarily think that Senator Sanders has a lock on the Hispanic vote in Texas the way he did, say, in Nevada. For one thing, the Castro brothers, Secretary Julian Castro obviously ran for president, got out of the race, supported Senator Warren, and his brother, Congressman Joaquin Castro, who has also supported Senator Warren, have been barnstorming South Texas, their home city of San Antonio, but also the Rio Grande Valley, hoping to get votes out for Senator Warren. I think she's the sleeper today. I'm curious to see where she lands. I think that she will do well in the Hispanic community and maybe take some of those votes away from Senator Sanders the way that he dominated in Nevada.
We have seen almost nobody make a major financial investment in Texas other than Mayor Bloomberg. And I feel like in a normal cycle, you can extrapolate a little bit from money spent towards results expected. It doesn't feel like that's the dynamic in Texas right now. Am I reading that right?
Well, you're correct that he spent a ton of money in Texas. I wish I could show you the amount of mail that we've all gotten from Mayor Bloomberg in the last couple of months. Oh, my goodness, the amount of money that was spent on that direct mail. But there's not really any reason to think, based on what we're seeing the last couple of days, that he is going to stay at that level that Steve Kornacki quoted a couple of minutes ago. The early vote is one thing. I think the dynamic of this race really has pivoted off of Saturday. Vice President Biden got very significant endorsements over the last couple days, including Congresswoman Veronica Escobar in El Paso, State Senator Carol Alvarado in Houston, State Representative Jessica Gonzalez in Dallas. There's a consolidation happening, I think, over the last couple of days. I was skeptical, Rachel, honestly, coming into tonight, that Vice President Biden could overtake Senator Sanders if the early vote came in strong for Senator Sanders. Just numerically, it was a math problem for the vice president. But hearing Steve say that Joe Biden slightly beat Bernie Sanders in Dallas County, slightly beat Bernie Sanders in Harris County in the early vote, those are massive population centers. And now I'm beginning to think maybe Joe Biden's going to win Texas. We'll see when the votes come out.
Evan Smith, CEO and editor-in-chief of Texas Tribune. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And a break for our coverage. When we come back, we have a new characterization of an existing race. And don't forget, we have a Texas poll close coming up in just about 3 minutes.